So, tell us a little bit about yourself, your childhood, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I guess the thing relevant to our discussion would be, I was raised in by Christian parents and got divorced when I was around the age of 5. I went into the custody of my dad, and from there on out, my family, or not my family, I should say my dad, he didn't really raise us in the faith. We didn't go to church. We never read the Bible. We never, prayed together or anything like that.
What is your thoughts of a deity and the afterlife?
Yeah, I would consider myself to be a Christian. I believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The one, revealed in the Hebrew Bible is Jehovah or Yahweh. And, in regards to an afterlife, I guess there's one quote, I'll quote you from the Bible. This is something that I would be in agreement with, and I think it's pretty basic. It's in Daniel chapter 12, verse 2. It says, "And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame, everlasting contempt." And I would be in agreement with that.
Why exactly do you believe that the Christian dogma and different beliefs are the right belief?
Yeah, well, let me see. I guess because I have studied, I've read a handful of the other holy books of the world and, looked at a lot of their faith systems, particularly the major ones. And I think a lot of it, for example, is it just kind of builds off the things that came before it, so it doesn't convince me in that regard. Or a lot of the claims that they make just don't add up. Like, for example, something that both Islam and Mormonism have the same that they teach is they teach that God inspired these scriptures originally, but then as time went on, they were lost and perverted, and so the Bible we have today is not what they had in the beginning. Okay, well that's all good, but my issue is why have been no discoveries, of manuscripts that are something that you would agree with. I mean, I think if something is true, there's going to be some evidence to it, and there's, thousands of discoveries of manuscripts that, agree with what our Bibles say today. So, that's just one of the reasons why I would discount some of these other systems.
You also made a video about morality, saying that God can take away what He created in the likes of when He kills children and kills other human beings. So, in that sense, why would He even create it if He knows everything? And why did He create something that He knew He was going to kill anyway?
Yeah, as far as my research is concerned, as far as from the Bible, I wasn't able to find any real reason on why He does that. Maybe it's out there, and if it is, somebody can let us know, but I don't know what it is. So, if the Bible's silent on the aspect, then, I don't know, and I'd probably just rather not speculate.
Okay, so at least you admit you don't know, so. And you also say that it never commanded for women to be raped, but that doesn't mean He doesn't condone it. He still says you can have these women for whatever you want. Does that make it right?
Well, yeah, ultimately it comes down to this. It comes down to, whether or not you trust God. And, and that's really central, because if you notice the differences between, say, like Abraham or Christians nowadays, while they were saved in, got to be careful how I say this, but the way that they were saved was not 100% identical. For example, Abraham didn't believe in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. He didn't even know the guy. But what he did have, and what Christians later have, which is identical, is they basically have a trust in God, willingness to trust God. And that's the similar vein that ties them both together. So, for the Christian nowadays, or, for any believer in centuries past, that's basically the idea, is that you trust God when he does these things. You understand the fact that he is good. And, if you do understand the fact that somebody is good, then it gives you assurance that when you see them doing things that you might not understand, you trust in the fact that it's playing out to a good, ultimately there's some good behind it. So that's, I'll be the first to say, I don't understand everything that, God has done or that God does do, but, I'm not going to condemn it just because I don't understand it.
But if you say it comes down to trust, I mean, I trust my parents, and I trust people that I love. But if I saw them rape somebody, if I actually seen them rape somebody or offered somebody to be raped, to me that completely changes my trust in them. So how can you actually realize that he's condoning this, he's allowing it, and yet still say that he is a good person or a good deity when he allows women to be raped or allows anything like this to happen and actually condones it?
Yeah, I think you got to be careful about the words you use, condone, and maybe I'd have to look up exactly what that means, because I think there's a lot of stuff that happens that that God doesn't like the fact that it happens, but he chooses not to intervene. So whatever you want to define that as, I'm not really sure. And honestly, when it comes down to something like rape, I can't think of any good outcome from that. So that would ultimately be my belief on saying that I don't believe that God ever condoned it. I mean, if you can think of a good idea behind rape, then by all means let me know, and then maybe I could fantasize the fact of how God might use that for good. But until I can see a possible good outcome from rape, I'm skeptical of the fact that God ever would have condoned that. If anything, that could be a possibility of an answer, but ultimately, once again, it's one of those things that I'm not aware of a Bible answer, so anything I gave you would be speculation at best.
Yeah, and it seems that you keep going to it just comes down to trust, and it comes down to your faith, and that God is good, even though you don't know the answer. Well, in order to trust somebody, you have to know they're there first. So how is it there's a God there to trust, even?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't be the kind of person to say I know there's a God. I definitely believe there's a God, and you could go into an entire new discussion on, well, what does it mean technically to know something, and that can mean different things to different people, of course. I believe there's a God, based on the evidence that I've seen. It convinces me, though it might not convince everybody.
Okay. And you said in your videos you'll be one of the first people to say that God did endorse slavery, but then you justify it by saying it was different types of slavery. Now explain that a little bit.
This is kind of the idea, is that I think probably, a lot of times actions in themselves are not evil, but it's the way in which they're used. Murder, for example, right? Yeah. In the book of Exodus, it talks about how people are not to murder, but then later on they're given in Numbers chapter 35, I think it's verse 30. God says how the people, when someone is convicted of being a murderer, or they're proved that they're a murderer, that the people were to murder that person. So, for example, there's one of these examples where at first the Israelite people were told don't kill, but then later on they were given an example in which to kill. So if I'm a person of that day, the way that I'm going to understand it is I should never kill unless God tells me to. And then that would be kind of an allowance to the rule.
Wouldn't you just consider that a contradiction, where he says not to kill, and then he says to kill this person? I mean, you're giving it sort of a scapegoat routine to get out of it and say it's a loophole if God says it's okay. But he also says it's not okay.
I think faith, ties into all this stuff, but one important thing to look at is, the motives behind why certain things are done and why certain things are laid out. For example, like, why would God be against murder most of the time? Because our murder would just be motivated by, our greed for something somebody else has, or our hatred toward them, something like that. But when he commanded murder, it was more for an act of justice, right? It was to take the murderer out and punish them for what they had done. So, and ultimately the aspect of, trusting that God is good and having faith in that would be, trusting his judgment, which, honestly, when you look at people, we're people that we don't know everything. So if we knew somebody who did know something, I don't think it would be surprising to say that they would know more than us, or that they could know more than us. So ultimately, it's a matter of trusting that God knows why the situation is better than how we might think.
Well, if he says this person needs to be taken out of justice for himself or for the better of his people, why doesn't God take him out himself instead of making these people kill him when he already told them that it's wrong to kill? Why doesn't he just kill that person himself or deal with them himself in some other way?
Well, the interesting thing is, I think sometimes in the Bible you could probably actually find accounts where God does kill people himself. Like, for instance, he would send an angel down, and the angel, would wipe out a group of people. So I think there's definitely instances in which he can and does act of himself. I think one of the reasons behind that is because, it helps build up our faith, and it gives God an opportunity to bless us.
So you're saying, basically, if you do something that God tells you to do, you'll be blessed no matter what it is, even if he tells you to kill this person, which he explicitly tells you not to do in Exodus. Or if he tells you to go and pillage a town and then keep the women, you'll be blessed for it.
I think you would always be blessed for obeying God, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so lastly, you say that you have a prophecy that an atheist cannot disprove, and it's that few will get into heaven. So how is that a prophecy that we can't disprove?
Right. Well, it's kind of like one of the ways that I explained it is, for example, a lot of people take issue with, my calling it a prophecy. And I looked it up in, Merriam-Webster's dictionary, and, one of the definitions of prophecy is a prediction of something to come. So my prediction, the prediction, of course, in that passage I mentioned in my video, which was Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 through 14, the prediction is where it says, many will enter through the road that leads to destruction, predicting that many are going to enter through the road.
But just because you can't falsify it and prove that it's wrong, how does that automatically deduce that it's right?
Oh yeah, true. Ultimately, the only way that I could say, I think, would be to verify that that passage that I read, what Jesus said, is when it happens, right? Like, for example, if it's all true, the people who have already died and who are already separated from God, that would be enough evidence for them, I'm sure. But it wouldn't be enough evidence for us over here because we haven't experienced it yet. Until then, it's just something people need to make a judgment on, and
yeah. See, I think that your title of it is you're stating that it can't be disproven because there's facts to prove it. I guess it was misleading to me. So,
yeah.
But again, you just say you can't disprove it because I could say that there's going to be an earthquake tomorrow, and you can't disprove it until tomorrow comes.
Ultimately, yes.
Okay, so that's all I have.